This is a tutorial on how this dock is my train fucked was built. The main use case for this dock is if you are taking the New York City subway, you click on one of these buttons for a subway line, and the headline at the top will tell you if the train is indeed fucked. And then also down below, it'll give you some more details about what exactly is going wrong with that train. So the main interaction is just clicking on these buttons and seeing if that train is fucked or not. If you scroll down below, you can see more details about any subway alerts that happened in the last 24 hours and which lines are affected and when the alert happened and why the train is down. And I'm going to walk you through how I built this dock in just a few hours, along with the pack that integrates with the MTA Subway Alerts API. So the first thing I looked at was the developer resources for the MTA. You have these GTFS feeds, but the format is not that interesting because if I copy this and open a browser page, it's like kind of really hard to decipher. That's because GTFS is some really specific format for transportation. And if I look at down here, the JSON feeds, I looked at the subway alerts and I copy this, open up a link. And it looks more interesting, like a JSON object that I can use for a table within Coda. And this is still kind of a shitty format. You can't really tell what the objects are and what the different values are. And so I just copied this link and put it into this JSON formatter tool. You can upload the data, click on the URL here, load the URL. And then this outputs something here, which I'll expand. And this is a little more nicely formatted where I can actually see what all the different objects are. And I like to look at this as a tree. So now if I click, I'm zooming a little bit. If I click on this header, you'll see some information about this data set. But if I click on this entity, you'll notice there's 228 entities, and each one is essentially an alert. So for this one, close this out. For this first one, if I click on alert, I'll see an active period and from entity, some more information. If I click deeper into these things, this is starting to look more like interesting information that I can pull from for instance, this shows that this is the L train, which stop is affected. This start and end time is interesting because I can copy, this is like an epoch time. If I copy this and paste it into here, you'll see that this is for April 22nd. I think there's another time that's more important or informative for me. This real-time Mercury alert, if I say copy this created at, this is more specific on when this alert actually was issued by the MTA. The second, that's 3:17 p.m. So I know that this data works for me, and I just need to pull this out and put it into a sync table in Coda because I can have almost real-time alerts from the MTA. So let's start creating a pack. The first thing I'm going to do is go to Coda Packs, click on Create a Pack. And the first thing I do, I always use this cat photos example because it's just the easiest one I found to use. Click on that, and I'm going to call this MTA test temporary pack. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And a lot of this stuff I don't need for my pack. Like I don't have a tag parameter, so I'm going to delete this part of the code. I also don't have any formulas. I'm going to delete this. And the format, I don't need all this stuff. The schema I do need, so I'm going to keep this thing here for now. And the sync table I also need, so I'm going to keep that. Let's start by building this out. So the network domain, that's just basically the kind of the URL for the endpoint from MTA. And that in this case is mta.info. So I'm just going to replace this with mta.info. And then here, I'm going to start defining the sync table that's going to show all my data from the MTA API. So this is going to be called alerts. Entity name is going to be alert schema. I'm going to rename this to be alert schema. And then down here, I'm going to call this is the actual formula for the sync table. I'm going to say sync alerts, syncs the subway alerts from MTA. And then usually when you are creating a sync table, you want to get the user to input something into the table. In this case, I don't have any inputs from the user, so I'm just going to delete this tag parameter and then also delete this from the variable from the formula. And then I actually don't need this stuff because I don't have any query parameters for the endpoints. I'm going to delete this. And then for the URL, I can just literally just copy and paste this URL, this JSON object, and then put it into this by putting it in quotes. And I'm going to rename some of these variables to just be specific to my use case alerts. And response.body, this pulls the response of this. I'm actually going to use this now instead. And the main thing I want to pull back from the API is the entity, which is this 228 list of objects. So I'm going to change this to be response.body.entity, a result equal blank. And then we're going to change this variable to be more suited for my use case, alert of alerts. And I'm basically cycling through all of the alerts here that I'm defining up here. So now I can start pushing data into my sync table. So the first thing I'm going to do is call this alert ID. This is like the main ID, unique identifier of the alert from the MTA. And this is going to be just alert.id. And just to show you what this looks like, I'm going through each of these objects and now just pulling over this value, pulling this value, and that goes into this field called alert ID. The next one I'm going to pull is alert headline text. And I'm going to kind of copy over some code here from my other pack. And this is going to be alert.header text translation text. And if I look inside the object, this is what I'm looking at. Alert, and then header text, which is right here, and then translation, and then the first object, which is 0, which is here, and then the text, which is this guy right here. So it's going to get L transit running with delays in both directions, blah, 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 blah. So that's the headline text. The next one is HTML. So you can actually get the text, the alert in HTML format. And so that's this property right here. It's the same thing, except I'm pulling the second object, which is this, and it has some HTML code in there. And I just go through one by one and pull out all the relevant things from this object that is interesting to me. So I'm going to just copy and paste a bunch of stuff right now from my finished pack. There we go. So I have the text, the headline text, the HTML, the text alert. I also have a detailed text from the alert, and then the time that the alert was created, the last time the MTA updated the alert, and then also the type of alert. The type can correspond to, it could be a delay. It could be also mostly delays. I'm trying to find a different one here. Here's a stop skipped one. So you can see there's different types of alerts the MTA will issue on the subway system. The last thing I want to put in are the most important things are which lines are affected. And this is a little tricky because if I look at the lines, sometimes this is in the informed entity piece. Sometimes we just have one line that's affected. In this case, the L train, and there's one stop. But notice there's only two options here. If I look at another alert, try to find one with multiple informed entities, now there's got to be one around here somewhere. Here's one. This informed entity has 5 options. And let's see where it's here. Here we go. Back down here. Okay, so let me just click down here and notice that this has the D train being affected. This one, it shows the stop ID, stop ID, stop ID, stop ID. So there's variable amounts of informed entities in this data set. Sometimes there's only 3, like an F train plus the stop IDs. Other times there's multiple. I'm trying to find another example, a good example here. In this case, there's only 2, just the route and the stop. So we have to account for multiple lines and multiple stops because there might be more than one line that's affected. And so we have to account for that variability. So in this case, above in my loop here, I'm going to put let informed entities will the alert and inform entity, which is this thing right here. And then I'm also going to set up a few kind of arrays, which is lines and stops. And then I'm going to paste in this loop right here And what this does is it goes through each of these inform entities. So, these two right here, in some case we have 3, in some case we have 5, and it goes through each one of these and it says, if it's a route ID, push the route line to, in this case, F train, for instance, it pushes it to the lines variable. Otherwise, push it to the stop ID, which is this guy right here. So we just look at whether or not this route ID exists. And this way we can get multiple lines that are affected into one column. And so down here, I have to also define lines and stops. So like down here, I'm going to say line, it's a table. This is going to be the lines variable, which I set up here. And then the stop will be the stop IDs that I set up here. And that is pretty much my sync table, all started from that cat example. Now I need to define the schema. In this case, I'm going to just call this, down here, I call this alert schema. So I just need to change this to be alert. And then let's see here, the properties, I'm going to scroll down here and just define some of these things first. Display property, this will be alert ID. I want the ID to be the main display property. The ID property will also be alert ID. Then featured properties, I'm going to just copy and paste some of the columns that show up by default in my sync table. So alert ID, line, the headline text, and when it was created. And this information I'm going to kind of delete for now and just copy and paste all of the properties from my existing sync table. And these individual properties all correspond to what we just built down here. Alert ID, line, stop ID. All I'm doing up here is defining what type of property that this property is. So in this case, alert ID is going to be a string. The line is a string. The headline HTML, that's the HTML here. It's header text. That's this thing right here with the HTML. That's going to be a Coda type of HTML. And then we have a few date times here. And so you just want to be very organized with how you set this up. And then that is pretty much it. So let's see if I can build this and hopefully there's no issues. All right, create a test doc. And now I'm going to start showing you how I actually built out this doc. So we'll call this MTA test is my train bug. And I'll copy this and put it in the title as well, and zoom out a little bit. And I can just drag and drop this into my Coda page. And I'm just going to wait for this to sync. And this is, again, pulling from the API that I put inside the pack. And you can pull really any information from an API that has structured data into a nice table in Coda, as long as you define the schema and all those things we showed. And there we go. Now we have all of this great information from this really messy endpoint. And I can unhide some more columns here. Maybe I want to look at the stop ID. I want to look at the type. And now I can see the most, and maybe I'll sort also by when the alert was created. And now I can see the last alert was the F train at 1:48 p.m. And looks like that it's delayed going southbound. So now we have some really cool data, and there should be around 220 or so alerts going back to about 2023. All right, so we have our main table of data. And now how do I actually use this and create the buttons and all that kind of stuff similar to this doc right here? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse this for now because I don't want to show how I'm going to build this doc. The first thing I want to do is I just create a few buttons. So I'm going to create a button, and this one will be, call this like one train. And I don't want any, actually I just want this to one. And the advanced thing, I'm going to say I want this to be called one train. Actually, I don't think this really matters what I call it, but say no for errors, give it a red color, make it very large. And I don't want an icon. So right now there's an error. And what I did, if you look at the actual doc, is I did something like this where you have an admin section, call this admin, and I have alert line, I made a text box called current train. I'm going to name this text box current train. And if I press this button 1, I want to change this text box to be the number 1. So I'm going to right click this and I'm going to say set control value, set the current train, which is that text box I created, and make it 1. Now, if I click on this 1, it turns into a 1. I'm going to make another button for the 2 train. Call this 2, 2. So now if I click on this, it would change this to 2. And I can do this for all these buttons up here. So let's just focus on these 2 buttons right now. I'm going to make a filtered view of my alerts down here. So I'm going to start typing in /alerts, and this is a view of that alerts table. And I'm going to say filter this table based on when the line, that's this column right here that has all of the subway routes. Just to recap here, you notice how some of these rows have multiple lines, because that's when I was creating this variable right here. The multiple lines, this if the alert has multiple subway lines, it gets pushed into this lines variable, which then gets pushed into this line column, which is this column right here. So I want to filter this line column to use that canvas control, which is this text box called current train. So use this canvas control and then set this to current train. And now this looks at just the, let me hide the stop ID for now. This looks at just the lines for line 2. If I click on 1, this changes to 1, and then this goes all to show only the 1 train alerts, which is only 13 alerts going back to March 18, 2024. So I'm going to call this filtered view of alerts. And then I also want to filter for only the last 24 hours. So I'm going to filter this and say add filter where the created at. I want to look at only ones created in the last 24 hours. And I believe I have to make a formula. So I'm going to say formula, show formula where the created at is greater than today minus 1. So that's basically showing anything created in the last 24 hours. So now we only have 1 alert in the last 24 hours. For the 1 train, click on 2, there is now no alerts. And if I put a 3 here, let's see what happens to 3, nothing there. Let's try the N train, should be something there, nothing there. D train, yep, the D train has an alert from today, 121. So now I have this filtered list, which I can use for showing stuff like right here. So this formula right here at the very top, it's just a call out, and that looks like this. I'm just going to put this right here at the very top, call out, change this to like a little info icon. I'm going to copy and paste the formula for this into this here. I can write equals, and this is the formula. So num alerts, I forgot to define that. So num alerts, another admin variable, I'm going to create num alerts. Just going to look at the equals filtered view of alerts, and it just counts the number of rows. So there's 1 alert here. Again, if I press 2, there's no alerts, and therefore the num of alerts formula shows 0. So if I look at this formula here for the very top, I'm going to replace this num alerts. Sorry, I have to rename this variable to be num alerts. Num alerts. So I can now use this number in other parts of my doc, and it's already replaced it. So basically it looks at the number of alerts if it is greater than 0, I believe. Let me just double check my other doc to see how I did it. Oh, sorry. I made this actually greater than 0. So this isn't, instead of checking the count, this just tells me true or false if the number of alerts is greater than 0. So 1 should be true, 2 is false. So now this looks at if the number of alerts is true, then show the current train, which is in this text box, is fucked. If it's not, if there is an alert, if this is true, then show that it is fucked. So that's how you can do the alert at the very top. And then, so this is basically matching up with this guy right here. And then to get the other details about the alert, like if I click on the 1 train here, you can see all this data about the alert, this all comes straight from this filter view of alerts. So I can say alert text, and I can say equals filtered view of alerts dot alert headline text. And this now shows you exactly what's going on with the one train. Nothing will show up for the two train. One train shows here. And I can just do this for each one of these variables or properties related to the train. And that's pretty much it. So this took me about 2 to 3 hours to build from the pack, which I just walked through. The doc, I can just create all these buttons. Those buttons put values in this text box. This text box tells me whether this formula tells me whether or not this train has any alerts. And then that controls this message right here. In my actual doc, I also have formulas here showing like if that count is greater than 0, then show an alert. But that's essentially it. And so with one simple endpoint here from the MTA, you can build this really kind of fun little train app to tell you if the train is on time or not. This code is all available on the Pack's page. So if you want to find other alerts to put into your doc, you feel free to play around with it. Pack here, and then just look at I think the source code is somewhere here. Let's click on source code. And this is the actual code I use. It's really similar to what I just put up in this pack. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching.